I'm the eldest son. You knew living with my mother would be a possibility when we got married, didn't you? You never mentioned that when we first got married. My husband, having moved in with my mother-in-law earlier than his sister, sold his family home. He has left the sole responsibility of taking care of my mother-in-law to me, a stay-at-home wife. He must have planned this for a long time. My name is Laura. I'm a 46-year-old housewife. My husband, Robert, is 44 years old. He works for a decent company, but he's a subsection manager who boasts about his Ivy League education. We have 2 sons. We are a family of 4, but following our eldest, our youngest son also graduated from college this summer and moved out. At such a moment, my husband suddenly started to act on his own. "We're going to take in my mom soon," he declared. I'm hearing this for the first time. I was shocked, as this was news to me. My mother-in-law lost her husband, my father-in-law, last year. Considering they were a couple who always did everything together, I had been worried about how shocked my mother-in-law must have been, but living together suddenly, anyone would be surprised. "You have plenty of time," he implied, since I am, after all, a stay-at-home wife. He instructed me to visit my mother-in-law every day and talk to her. I argued that if I went every day, it might exhaust my mother-in-law, but my husband's aim was to make me and my mother-in-law get along through frequent visits. For him, bringing up living together wasn't easy, even to his own mother. So he used me, thinking that if us 2 women got along well, it would be easier for him to implement his plan. The house where my mother-in-law lives now is a stylish, standalone house built by my late father-in-law in a popular area, not in downtown but somewhere akin to a suburb in Chicago. If put up for sale, there would definitely be many buyers willing to buy it for a great price. Right. My husband got his eyes on this house. I sense that by living with my mother-in-law, he wants to gain the right to do whatever he pleases with his parents' house. A few days later, my husband came home looking irritated. Apparently, his sister contacted him. "You have been visiting my mom, haven't you?" he said while roughly throwing his coat at me. "Yes, about once every 3 or 4 days," I replied, hanging his carelessly thrown coat on a hanger. "My sister went to visit Mom today after a long time, and she said that from the kitchen to the bathroom, the entire house was a mess. You've been cleaning up over there, haven't you?" I was ticked off by his implication that I might be leisurely snacking and chilling out when visiting my mother-in-law's house. Of course I've been helping with the chores and shopping. I've even organized the fridge before leaving. My husband laughed scornfully and said, "Well, I guess this is the most I can expect from a housewife," and glanced around the living room. It hasn't been long since our youngest son just moved out, so he may be right that the room isn't totally clean, but it's not messy to the point that makes it hard to go about our usual days. My husband Robert has a nasty habit of nagging me about being a full-time housewife whenever he's in a bad mood. He always picks on the smallest things. If I stay silent, he assumes he's won the argument and cheerfully believes he's triumphed, which, of course, improves his mood. I often wonder if belittling his wife is really that satisfying for him. When he comes home from work tired, he'd demand, "Get my dinner out on the table already. Seriously, can't you do anything without me telling you?" That was Robert, always trying to assert his dominance. Then one day, I got a call from my sister-in-law. It seemed she had had a talk with Robert and she told me. Robert insists that if he moves in with Mom, he should be able to sell the house and keep all the money to himself. Laura, are you planning to move in? If I had any hesitations about living with our mother-in-law, she offered to take her in instead. I told her, "We just started discussing the possibility recently," to which she responded as if she had her own schemes in mind. "So it's not confirmed yet then," and hung up. When I told Robert about this conversation, he became furious, barking, "Why did you reveal our plans without asking me?" I replied, saying, "This is about discussing our mother's future, isn't it? You make it sound like a property dispute." He gave me a scornful look and sneered. I really hate dealing with idiots who can't think straight. This is what our relationship dynamic really is like for the most part. He'd belittle me for being a housewife and a high school graduate, always trying to make me submit to him. I was drawn to his confidence and reliability when we got married, but the things I loved about him have morphed into the things I loathe about him. What's worse, he'd occasionally boast about marrying an older woman, for me being 2 years older than him. He mocked me for not having a college degree and pushed me into being a housewife, claiming no one would want to hire a high school graduate. Ever since our children moved out, I've been feeling more and more stressed about my interactions with Robert. To be honest, I've been feeling as though I've reached my limit with this marriage. Robert, oblivious to my feelings, likely wants to move in with his mother as soon as possible, probably aiming to pocket all the money from selling her house. He doesn't seem to consider how his parents might feel about their home being sold or the memories they've built there. In the midst of these conflicting interests among family members, I encountered a shocking reality. It began with a call from my mother-in-law who had sprained her ankle. She said her room was in a mess and needed help cleaning it up. Although several days had passed since my sister-in-law had last visited, I figured that's what she was talking about the other day, so I responded lightly, "Sure, I'll come over." It didn't seem like she had informed Robert, but she assured me I didn't need to let him know either. So I visited her with a light heart. The following day, I rang my mother-in-law's doorbell. I heard her shout, "It's open," from the yard. I turned the knob and stepped into the entrance. An unpleasant odor was already noticeable. I saw dust accumulated in the corner of the corridor, with towels and discarded socks scattered around. The stench grew stronger as I entered the living room, where I found a stack of cushions piled on the sofa. My mother-in-law? Did she go somewhere? I murmured. Then I heard, "I'm here," so I followed where the voice was coming from. There, I found my mother-in-law buried in a stack of cushions on the couch, which seemed to be adjusted for comfort. The cushions were piled up so high that I hadn't noticed she was there. Excuse me, Mom? Are you all right?" I called out as I approached her. The peculiar smell grew stronger. Trying not to gag from the smell, I searched for its source. "I'm okay. I just piled up the cushions because it's comfortable." She laughed heartily. I realized the source of the smell was my mother-in-law herself. With all my might, I tried not to pinch my nose and asked her, "How's your leg?" "Were you unable to bathe because it was inconvenient?" She replied, Yes, about that. I healed quickly, but after a few days of not bathing due to the pain, I couldn't be bothered to take a shower." "Do I smell?" I refrained from answering and said, "I will clean up," and proceeded to open all the windows in the house. My mother-in-law certainly needed a thorough bath. Thinking this, I headed to the bathroom. The bathtub had some water filled and was left as is with the lid half submerged. Soap scraps and towels were all muddy in the wash basin, and the mirror was foggy and dirty. I can't remember the last time I was here, but I wonder if my sister-in-law didn't visit in the meantime. I was puzzled how this could be neglected for so long, but for now I cleaned the bathroom, filled up the tub with fresh water, added lemon bath salts for fragrance, and told my mother-in-law, "I've just cleaned the bathroom and prepared a bath for you. Please, take a bath first. Meanwhile, I'll air these out," I said, pointing at the cushions my mother-in-law was buried in. The kitchen was in an appalling state, but the rest of the rooms were not that bad, with only a few layers of accumulated dust. The kitchen was filthy. It looked as though roaches might be lurking around, but I braced myself and cleaned it until it was spotless. "That was refreshing," my mother-in-law, returning, said as she came back to the living room. Her cheeks, flushed like a boiled lobster, glowed from having days of built-up dead skin washed off. Because I had been cleaning like crazy, the living room and kitchen were mostly tidied up. My mother-in-law was very pleased with the result. Finally, in the cleaned living room, I asked my mother-in-law, "You were always so tidy and organized, Mom. What happened all of a sudden?" Ever since I got married, my mother-in-law was always neat and her house was well maintained, but this time it was a surprise to see her place in such a state. to the point that she needed to call for help. So I straight up asked her. She said, "Did you notice that I just used my injured foot as an excuse? I've been living with my husband for decades, doing my best as a wife and mother. But last year, after my husband passed away, I felt a sudden sense of freedom. Her children were already independent and married. Her husband was no more here with her. She wanted to slack off and do nothing for once," she said. "I also know that the kids want to sell this house, and it could escalate into a nasty fight over it. But I have an idea," my mother-in-law said, staring intensely as she shared her thoughts. My mother-in-law, out of her usual character, gave me a strong gaze as she opened up to me. As I listened to her, I felt like I had been idling away, lost in thought, in an effort to find answers. Leaving her house, I began to think about my own future as well. So far, my relationship with my mother-in-law had only been as distant as a typical daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationship. But the fact that it was not her biological daughter or son who she revealed her lowest self, I felt was indicative of my mother-in-law's feelings. Days passed without sharing this incident with anyone. After a while, my husband, Robert, came home from work and blurted out, "We're going to invite my mom to live with us." As I was watching TV, I asked him to repeat himself. "We're inviting my mom to move in with us." "And what does your mom think?" I asked. "There's no need to ask her," he said. He seemed to think that any parent would be happy if their child offered them to move in with them. "You should check with your mom first instead of just making decisions on your own," I suggested. But in response, he smirked, turning around. What a high and mighty thing to say for a stay-at-home wife. "Don't forget, if you can't obey what I say, divorce is always on the table." Seeing his face, I felt at my wit's end. He knew that being a housewife and nearly in my 50s, I wouldn't be able to make it on my own if we divorced, which is why he was threatening me with divorce, attempting to stir up my anxiety and manipulate me at his will. But I had an unexpected savior, and unbeknownst to my husband, my life was about to take a dramatic turn. I ignored his provocative comment, finished dinner, and went to bed. My husband, feeling that he had completely cornered me with his divorce threat, was in a good mood. He's probably thinking of inviting his mother as planned, sweet-talk her into selling her house, and pocket the money all to himself. The next morning, I packed my belongings and left the house. When Robert came home to find an empty house, he seemed startled, and my phone kept ringing. I read the incoming messages without responding, just so he wouldn't cause any trouble by reporting to the police or anything. The message Robert sent read, "Are you so against living with my mom? But if we live together, that house will be ours. Don't you see how great that would be?" My suspicion was right. His interest wasn't to stay with his aging mother to support her, but rather to profit off her house. I told this to my mother-in-law. She looked a little sad, and it pained me a bit, but she seemed determined and said she would act according to her feelings. Yes, the place I went after leaving my husband was my mother-in-law's house. I took on a job and was busy using this place as my base. Robert, growing anxious since I wasn't responding, blew up my phone with calls and texts. And after a week, he contacted my family in Nebraska, and I got a call from my mom. "Laura, where are you? Robert claims that you're with us. He even said he's going to come get you even though I told him you're not here." I explained the situation to my mother and informed her that I'm currently staying at my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law then took the phone, offering a long greeting. For some reason, my mother gave me a word of encouragement. "Wishing you the best of luck." Eventually, my mother-in-law said, "It's about time." And that night, she called my husband, Robert. He was surprised to learn from his own mother that I was not at my parents' house, and immediately came over to our place. "Leaving the house so abruptly, I had no idea you were at Mom's. What's this about?" Robert blurted out the moment he saw me at his mother's house. Before I could even answer, my mother-in-law spoke up. "More than that, do you even understand why Laura left home?" What was it really about? Taken aback by her sudden question, Robert awkwardly replied, "Well, that was because I said I wanted to invite Mom over. Because she didn't want to live with you, right? Why would I be here if I didn't want to live with my mother-in-law? Ever thought about that? You see, it wasn't the idea of moving in with her that I disliked. What I hated was you for making selfish decisions without taking others' feelings into consideration," I continued. "My mother-in-law has her own thoughts and hopes, you know. Despite this, you decided on living together without even discussing it with her. You didn't even consider the feelings of your parents when they built this house. You just want this house because you want the money, right?" Robert clenched his fists and hardened his body, looking down as he listened to our conversation. My mother-in-law continued after me. "What do you really need? This house? Or Laura? If you don't change, you'll lose both. Why don't you cool down for a while and rethink everything?" Hearing this from his own mother, Robert, who had been quietly listening, suddenly kneeled to the ground in front of us. I was taken aback and asked, "What's this about?" "I apologize to Laura and to you, Mom. Please, I want to live together again and start anew." Raising his head from his bow, Robert continued, "Mom, will you live with us?" As Robert bowed down again, I looked at my mother-in-law and we shared a knowing smirk. After that, I resumed my life with Robert. But this time, I wasn't a stay-at-home wife anymore. My mother-in-law told her friends about how I deep-cleaned her room, a whole mess from the time she spent lazing around, just within a couple of hours. When I mentioned this to my friends, many of them said they wanted you to do the same for their homes. I was amazed and delighted to find that I could apply my housekeeping skills from being a stay-at-home wife to start a new job. I also began studying to become a storage advisor. It seemed that Robert had not given up on the idea of living with his mother, selling their house and getting a large amount of money. He seemed to think that it would become a reality now that my mother-in-law and I were getting along, but there was a surprise announcement from my mother-in-law. Surprisingly, she was getting remarried. "So I won't be living with you, and I won't be giving up my house either." Upon hearing the news, my sister-in-law congratulated her, although with mixed feelings. I sent my sincere blessings for my mother-in-law's decision. The one who was surprised by my mother-in-law's words and screamed out in shock was Robert. At the same time, he was frantically contacting various people. Apparently, Robert had taken a boating license without telling me and even purchased a small cruiser, counting on the money from selling his parents' house. Now that his plans had fallen apart, Robert was unable to cancel his order for the cruiser, and he seemed to have to work even harder than before. He ended up having to help me with my house cleaning job. As an employer, I'm drilling household chores to Robert and guiding him to clean and polish a great number of my clients' houses.